Now, as far as national security and constitutional changes are concerned, really, those are two worlds. I just cannot see how I could link or bridge national security and constitutional changes and in 15 minutes. I intend to finish in 15 minutes because I think self-discipline is a very important element in any public speaking. So that to deal with that, of how I can trace these two, I was thinking deeply, because to me it is like South Pole or North Pole, or like asking, like trying to draw a parallel between our present Defense Secretary and the former Defense Secretary. It's an impossible bridge to get close to. So I will make my efforts. Let me deal with national security. If we think, after having finished a war of 30 years, after being the most insecure country in South Asia, and now becoming the most secure in this region, that we can rest on our laurels or sit comfortably on our backside thinking that security is no longer an issue, we are greatly mistaken. Security still is, I think, the prime issue that we have to address, for the reason that we can already see the rumblings in the environment. We can see various parties now getting together, which was not something that we were able to see immediately after the ending of terrorism. Now we are moved to a stage where we see several parties. Let's examine who they are. We see on one hand the diaspora. Diaspora is still trying to get back to the old concept of an Elam state. They are able to do it not because they have been having a voice that is heard in Sri Lanka, but they have a voice that is heard in the countries they live, for the simple reason, not that there is any particular bondage between the diaspora and the Western nations that lodge them, but purely because the West is like sniffer dogs. If they see that votes are around, they sniff, and they would like to win that kind of population over. And that is one reason why the diaspora is active and is able to make impact on once again trying to resurrect a state of Elam in Sri Lanka. Then we have the foreign elements. They do it under the mask of human rights, good governance, democracy. But if you examine their own track records, remember it is President Obama who ordered every attack that is now being utilized by drones receive his official sanction. He personally sanctioned the death of Osama bin Laden, which if we did it, if our head of state indulged in that, he would have been named a war criminal. But there are double standards, and due to that, once again, the diaspora is working in a hand in glove with some of those foreign Western powers who are of course blowing hot and cold. They do not show all the time that they are in support of these concepts of Elam, but they do it more deceptively, they do it more craftily. They blow hot and cold to show us at times they are with us, but at other times when the critical time comes, like India, they will vote against us, and that is precisely what the West and India are presently indulging in. But we have to understand they have their priorities just as much as we have. So if their priorities are that, then it is our duty to be concerned about our national security. Then also trying to get once again through the democratic process, once again to bring back the rights of the Tamil people, which I think is very justifiable. If you ever talk of the grievances of the Tamils, it's quite different to talking about power to the Tamil politicians, because the grievances, some of them have been very correctly identified by the LLRC. Those are justifiable grievances, and if we create a climate where we can win over the Tamil population by addressing their grievances instead of giving power to their politicians, which is the element of danger, because it is at that point that they are able to take a step forward towards a state of Islam. And that they are doing it in a very sensible way. They are doing it in a deceptive way. They are doing it by trying to work through the 13th Amendment. Through the 13th Amendment, what the TNA is now saying is not asking for an Islam. They are doing it on a step-by-step basis. What they are trying to do is to get the 13th Amendment totally functional. 13th Amendment is very much a part of our law. It is in our constitution, and it is in existence except for two aspects. That is where I am trying to link constitutional changes to security. Where they are trying to find a weaver way is through the 13th Amendment, through police powers and through land powers. Now fortunately, whether it is the UNP or whether it is the PA, which are the two political parties, they have not so far conceded land powers and police powers. Of course, the land powers have been somewhat diluted by court decisions. Now, it is very important that we hold on to the police powers for the reasons I will shortly set out very briefly, trying to confine myself to the words of Dr. Mahanama of keeping to 15 minutes. Now, today to me, the most hostile group operating under the auspices of democracy is the TNA. Because the TNA will say one thing in Colombo, another thing in their convention in Batticaloa, another thing in India, and something else in the West. They are playing games. And I am here today, I think, because a more distinguished speaker than me, who was invited and who had accepted, had declined to appear. And I am sure if he came, unlike me, that it would have been far more interesting. But maybe there would have been political pressure on him, because addressing the forces would have been considered to be an act which might have feebled him with the people whom he associates in the TNA. If you ask me, honestly, any day I prefer the Prabhakaran to the TNA, because Prabhakaran, you knew what he stood for, you knew who the enemy was, but now we have a hidden enemy, an enemy working within the forces of democracy, an enemy who is even invited here, but enemy who is calculatingly working their way once again towards a state which Prabhakaran, the known enemy, whom we identified and eliminated, which we should not do to the TNA, because the TNA as in a democracy has every right to express their views, but we have every right to ensure that our security is in place. Security is well looked after, so that any such threat that comes, we are not going to bend and bow to that. And in that, I have been pressing very strongly that the forces have done their work. But now the forces have another job. The more important thing is now intelligence gathering. That is the prime thing. Because in a democracy, people have the right to oppose, and we must give them the right. Remember the TNA, which now boldly speaks at their Batticaloa convention, where they pass resolutions. Did they utter a word? Would they have if not for the rights of if not for the exercise by the forces, if not for the rights given by democracy, would they have been able to utter? Did they say any one of these things when the LTT was in power? Were they heard? Where were they? Were they in Sri Lanka? Some of them were underground or they were abroad. But today they have surfaced, and we must give them every right to surface, because this is a democracy. But surveillance is important, security is important. What is now important is we are properly guided by intelligence reports. And in that respect, I think it is very important. Something that we have neglected is the trilingual program. Because when I was in my short association with the forces, with the intelligence units, I found that the fact that we were not a bilingual or a trilingual society meant our intelligence information was inadequate. And intelligence is a two-way street. I have greatest regard and respect for military intelligence. But military intelligence alone is not sufficient, because the military can do certain functions under our law, and they cannot do certain functions because those are associated with the police powers. Now, if for example,